Hello everyone, welcome back to our book club. I am Miss Maka.
And I am Mr. Daryl. Welcome back indeed.
Okay, Mr. Daryl, what's our book for today?
An adventure tale, which I always love, Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah, by Jonathan Swift.
Now this is a satire, and it's also a satire on the way people behave as well as travelers' tales.
Yeah, exactly. And Gulliver's Travel is often listed as a satirical masterpiece.
So it's a masterpiece of satire.
Yeah.
Okay.
But before we look at the book itself, let's look at our agenda. We will start with the new vocabulary. Then we will talk about the author, and after we'll tell you shortly what is the book about. So we'll look at our summary.
From there we'll move to the characters. There's a few of them to take note of. We'll look at the setting, the when, the where of the tale, and finally conclude with a few main themes.
Yes, but we will never forget to give you the homework.
Oh, okay, let's look at our first word. Release, the noun release. And this is the state of being free from any commitment or obligation, release.
გათავისუფლება.
Next, brutish. Brutish, unusual sounding word, but it means being cruel or harsh in personality.
სასტიკი.
Our next word is repulsive. Repulsive, something disgusting or unlikable.
საზიზღარი.
Our next word is civilized. Civilized, being polite, well-bred, advanced.
ცივილიზებული.
Our next word is reasonable. Reasonable, being logical or being understanding of a situation.
გონივრული, ჭკვიანი, მისაღები.
Our next word is a verb, to converse. To converse, to talk informally with others about different topics.
საუბარი, ურთიერთობა.
Our next word is immortality. Immortality. This is having life or fame that continues long after you've passed on.
უკვდავება, მარადიულობა.
Our last word is to befriend. To befriend. This is to make friends easily with someone.
დამეგობრება. Okay, now let's move on and talk about the author, Jonathan Swift. He was born on 30th of November in 1667. Best known for writing Gulliver's Travels, he was the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. So he grew up fatherless, and his writings were published mostly under pseudonyms.
Switching from poverty, as he was born into, to a private school, which set him up for life, was a bit challenging. But in the end, he achieved a degree at Trinity College in Dublin, a really high-quality university. There was another event at the same time that maybe pushed him in a certain direction. The revolution, the Glorious Revolution, so-called, in England of 1688.
Yeah, he began to write first short essays and then a manuscript that later would become a book, and he anonymously published the tale of a tub and the Battle of the Books. But actually, it is worth mentioning that the tub book was actually not accepted by Church of England.
In fact, he becomes more politically involved. He becomes satirist, writing satire on political enemies of his, particularly the political party known as the Whigs.
Yeah, and in 1716 he traveled to London, where he benefited with the help of his friends, and they anonymously published his books. Now, these are travels into several remote nations of the world in 4 parts by Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then a captain of several ships, also known more simply as Gulliver Travels.
I prefer the shorter title.
Yeah.
The book was an immediate success and has not been out of print since its first run. Interestingly, much of the storyline points to historical events that Swift had lived through. And in 1742, to wrap it all up, He suffers from a stroke, a disease of the head, and lost the ability to speak. And he finally died in 1745.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the author, and we can see that he was politically a bit rebellious, right? So now let's ask a question to our audience. Do you think it is necessary for a writer who writes a book about politics to also be educated in it at university?
Maybe nowadays, yes, but today there are many sources where you can get new information from and be well aware of everything, and you can become expert really quickly.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yes, of course, and it would be our recommendation to our audience as well that yes, you can take up a new hobby and just get information from the internet, right?
That's right, and follow your passions. Sometimes your passions will lead you to certain topics.
Yes, of course. And modern life actually gives us lots of resources for that.
Yeah, well said. To our audience member. Let's go on to the summary, Ms. Maka.
Yeah.
Now, it is an adventure story, so there are a lot of tiny details to look at. We will try to compress it as much as we can. It's written in the first person, so it's written from the point of view of the protagonist, Lemuel Gulliver, a surgeon, a doctor, and a sea captain who visits remote regions of the world. So he travels around on a ship. And there are 4 adventures in it. In the first one, possibly one of the more famous ones, Gulliver is the only survivor of a shipwreck, and he swims to this place called Lilliput, where he's tied up by little people who are only about 6 inches, quite small, and he's taken to the capital city and is eventually released after some adventures.
Yes, and seeing a giant on their land, they understood that they could use Gulliver against the empire Blefuscu they were at war with, and Gulliver actually helps them, but eventually he loses the trust of these people, and they sentenced him to be blinded, and of course Gulliver had to escape from this, and he escaped to the empire to Blefuscu, but then he found a well-sized boat for him, and he went to England.
Mm-hmm. Now his second voyage takes him to a place called Brobdingnag, inhabited by a race of giants, this time a race of giants. Gulliver offers to make gunpowder, which was technology for that time, and cannon powder for the king, but the king is horrified by such cruel and destructive weaponry. Eventually, Gulliver is picked up by an eagle and rescued at sea by people of his own size.
Yeah. What about the third voyage? Gulliver goes to Laputa. So later he visits the island of the sorcerers, where Gulliver has a chance to meet all those great men from the past, and from those men he actually gets lots of information about the lies from the history.
In the extremely bitter fourth part, Gulliver visits the land of the Hunims, a race of intelligent horses who are cleaner, more rational, communal, and benevolent than other places he's been to so far. They have no word, for example, for evil. They're that good. And then they should be contrasted with the Yahoos, who are brutish, filthy, greedy, and degenerate humanoid race, and some of whom they have tamed.
Oh, yeah. So the Hunims are very curious about Gulliver, so who seems to be both a Yahoo and civilized. So actually it is very important to mention, I'm sure you all know that very popular website, yahoo.com. They took the name from this book, Yahoo. So after Gulliver describes his own nation, the Hunims decide that English people are just like the Yahoos, and that Gulliver has to leave. And finally, Gulliver returns to England, so disgusted with humanity that he avoids his own family and buys horses and converses with them instead. Actually, he really enjoyed living with Hunims.
Very good, and that leads to this next question, which I hope our audience can answer. You've heard our quick summary. Does Gulliver change as the story progresses? Does he learn from his adventures?
Obviously, the answer is yes, because we all know that traveling broadens our mind, and Gulliver also saw a lot of incredible things that influenced his personality.
Well said. Yeah, travel does broaden our mind.
Yeah, and especially these type of interesting voyages that Gulliver had.
Meeting all sorts of different kinds of people.
Yes,
It would,
course.
of course, have an effect on his personality.
Definitely. So now it is time to move to our characters. And of course, we will start with the main character. This is Gulliver. He is a trained surgeon and sea captain who travels throughout the world on several voyages, learning about different cultures. So we can say that from his voyages, he would be a very diverse person, an interesting one. Spent some 16 years and 17 months in his adventures, and ultimately returns home totally changed man. That is the answer to our previous question.
Yeah, it helps.
Yeah.
His first voyage leads him to Lilliput. His second voyage leads him to Laputa and elsewhere. What he does is he finds out their histories and cultures. So he's that kind of man. He's interested in the world, and this is one of the reasons he keeps traveling out to meet people.
On his fourth and last journey, Gulliver is sprung upon the Hunims, a ruling society of horses, where people are the lower, inferior, slave-like species. These inferior Yahoos are like considered to be dirty, and the creatures who kinda look like Gulliver. For the Hunims, of course.
And to close up on this character Gulliver, obviously you can see that the main point of Gulliver is to offer a commentary on us humans. So he meets these different kinds of cultures, but basically what he's doing is he's talking about the way we are.
Okay. From the first voyage, we've met those small, tiny people called Lilliputians. So the Lilliputians are minuscule people from the land of Lilliput. So we can see from the adventure that they are quite brave, because they, from the very first encounter with Gulliver, they try to save their land, and they are quite brave with that. But soon they realize that they cannot defend themselves from Gulliver, and they try to befriend Gulliver. Right? So after using so many of their resources and performing like some actions in public, he's forced to flee the country from to Blefuscu, right? Those tiny little creatures actually managed and freed Gulliver from their land.
Let's move on to the other race of almost like a character, these races. The next one is the Brobdingnags. They are the giant people, if you remember from our summary.
Yeah.
They view Gulliver as a toy, a doll, an exhibition, and he looks like a bug, but he acts as a person. And this is the surprising thing. So everywhere he goes, he's the odd one out, but they're always surprised because he acts normal and rational and intelligent. And they're always surprised by that. Although they are kind to him, Gulliver knows that he must leave them as well.
So our next characters, we could say characters in plural, these are Laputians. So Laputians are the people in the land of Laputa. These are people who live a life in mathematical contemplation, and they cannot really communicate without the help of a flapper.
So some kind of introverted, isolated people.
Exactly, and of course that would be very surprising for them to see Gulliver there.
More human and more movement.
Yeah.
Our last character are the Yahoos, which, as you mentioned, is connected to the website.
Yeah.
Let's see why they chose this name. and you might be able to guess. The Yahoos are detestable, so hated people, that infect the Hunim countryside metropolis. They're brutish, dirty, foul, immoral, but they look the most like human beings. And so Gulliver is actually considered to be a Yahoo. They mistake him for a Yahoo. After seeing them, Gulliver is disgusted to all extremes, and he cannot bear the sight of humans after that.
That's really interesting. Now, let's have a question from our character part. Is Gulliver an everyman figure, or does he have a distinctive characteristic, like character?
That's actually a good question. I would say neither. Gulliver, that is to say, Gulliver is a point of view character, transparent at times like a everyman figure, but other times he takes on at least two other distinct personalities.
Oh.
Wow, excellent answer.
Thank you very much. So yeah, definitely, maybe he has to change his personality accordingly from the society where he actually appears.
You know that saying, you have to wear the hats of a different culture wherever you find yourself? And he keeps changing hats to be this new person wherever he is.
Exactly.
Let's move on to the setting now. The when and the where, as we usually do. I'll look at the when first off. Although Swift is satirizing 18th century England, his sweep is universal. It's not really England he's concerned with. He's concerned with humanity. A reader who understands the political history of England will have a richer experience because of a lot of British and English terms, but at the same time, an intelligent reader of Gulliver's Travels will understand a lot about human nature, which the author Jonathan Swift is famous for doing.
Yes, and he also chose lots of different locations for the setting part of our book. So where does the story happen? So firstly, it is in England. So this is the place where Gulliver has a family wife, and actually this is the place where he had a very successful career in medicine. The second part is like Lilliput part, where Gulliver appears all of a sudden, and he studies their language and their customs. And part two occurs in Brobdingnag. So this is actually the most dangerous place from the book that we see. Yeah. So this is where Gulliver visits just simply because of his size. This is very dangerous for him, and the land is bordered by ocean on three sides, and it is inaccessible for the people who travel by land.
Now you've heard our setting. I've got a question for the audience. Why is the setting important to the story?
Many settings in a story provide satirical material to expose the socio-political folly of England and Europe.
Yes, it does. And it's a satire, so these things represent something else.
Of course, symbolic maybe. Okay, now let's move on to the main themes that we have chosen for you. The very first one is moral versus physical power. So in the first part of our book, we can see that Gulliver appears in the Lilliputians, on the Lilliputians' land, where his size is obviously bigger than the settlers that he encounters. But there are lots of situations where he can use his physical power, but he willingly refuses to do it, and he just escapes from them, not to harm them.
So showing them kindness.
Yes.
Conversely, with Brobdingnag, those people could easily squash him. Do you remember? They were the giants, and they could easily kill him, of course. But Gulliver was impressed with their kindness, actually, and their willingness to listen and empathize with him.
Yes. And as the novel considers the dangers of physical power in different societies, it also considers the physical character of the individuals and reflects on how to best handle this problem like one's body. It also shows the true superiority and worthy power come from moral and not physical advantages.
Good theme to talk about there. We have a second theme, society and the state. Now, as Gulliver travels from society to society, he observes each one's organization and the way they behave, and he compares that to his own England. Although all of the societies are flawed, they have some kind of problem with all of them, there's also admirable good qualities about some of them. And the point of seeing these for Gulliver is to bring it back to the English people and show flaws in England itself.
So, and that's it, exactly what Swift wanted to tell us from this story. He never draws up some kind of formula for an ideal state, because he just simply does not believe there is one. By showing the goods and ills of different societies, he's just telling us that we should only not focus on good ones or bad ones, but we should see the bad ones and correct them.
So what seems like an adventure story at first turns out to be a huge, very
political one, maybe.
Political, social.
Exactly. And he also tries to show us how to solve these problems, right? So, of course, by imaginary some kind of processes, but we can see some of the solutions that can be more or less considered.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay, now let's have a question to our audience from the main theme part. As we have talked about the moral versus physical power, do you think Gulliver would use his physical power against Lilliputians if he didn't escape from their land?
Yes, I think he would, because they were going to arm them, and he imagined that smashing them with their hands.
Thank you very much. Yes, of course, like it's kind of, I don't know, we will do it like just to save ourselves maybe, but in the story we can say that finally he willingly refused to harm Lilliputians.
I like such stories that you think it's one thing, but then it turns out to be much more rich than that.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Darrell, I think it is time to wrap up everything. Of course, we started with the author, Irish writer Jonathan Swift.
We moved on to the summary. As you remember, it's this doctor, surgeon, who traveled around the world, but in particular to 4 different places.
And then, of course, we talked about the characters. And this is Gulliver. And I want to mention here that in Georgia, we usually say Gulliver, but the correct pronunciation of this name is Gulliver. And we had Lilliputians, Laputans, and Houyhnhnms, and different creatures that create this beautiful story.
Remember, we had a look at the setting as well. It's the 18th century. Generally, and it's England and strange islands that he visits.
And of course, we have chosen main themes for you. This is physical power versus moral, and also society and state.
Excellent. Now, I think we should have a look at the vocabulary once more. I'm just going to say the words quickly for pronunciation purposes. Let's start with release, brutish, repulsive, civilized, reasonable, to converse, immortality, to befriend, and well, that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. All those 8 words. But of course, we should give you the homework, right, Mr. Darrell?
Yes.
Do you have a homework?
I do, and I'm looking forward to the answers. Here's the question of today. Imagine you suddenly appeared on the land of the Lilliputians. They are afraid and start defending themselves with arrows and bows. What would you say to convince them that you're not an enemy, that you're not going to harm them?
Yeah. წარმოიდგინეთ, რომ მოხვდით ლილიპუტების მიწაზე. მათ თქვენი ეშინიათ და საკუთარი თავის დაცვას იწყებენ ისრებით და ქვების სროლით. რას ეტყოდით მათ დასარწმუნებლად, რომ არ აპირებთ რამის დაშავებას?
Well, Ms. Maka, thank you for the discussion that we had today. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you, the audience, for your interesting answers.
And thank you to the TV audience for paying attention.
Yeah, I guess that's all for today, and we should say goodbye. Goodbye, everyone, and see you next week.
Have a great week. Goodbye.
Bye.